Mulan. Long ago, the Great Wall kept China safe from invaders, but one dark night, the Han army, led by the ruthless warrior Shan stormed the wall. Imperial guards lit flaming cauldrons to warn of the attack, while Shan grabbed the Chinese flag and set it ablaze. General Li reported back to the Imperial Palace ready for battle, but more soldiers were needed. The Emperor ordered his consul Chi Fu to go to the premises and call up recruits for the Imperial Army. A single grain of rice can tip the scale. One man may be the difference between victory and defeat, said the Emperor. Meanwhile, in a far-off village, young Mulan was preparing to meet the town matchmaker later that day. She wrote on her arms so she would remember what to say. Quiet and demure, graceful, polite. A good match and a good marriage would bring honor to her family, but she would need to impress the matchmaker first. On her way to town, Mulan stopped at the family temple to take tea to her father Fa Zhu. Leaning stiffly on his cane, he stood to greet her. "We're counting on you. Hurry," he urged. Then he prayed to the ancestors to bring his daughter some much-needed luck. At the village, Mulan's mother, Fa Li, waited anxiously for her daughter. Grandma Fa bought a lucky cricket. To test it, she closed her eyes and crossed a street teeming with carriages. Arriving safely on the other side, Grandma Fa announced, "Yep, this cricket's a lucky one." Just then, a dust-covered Mulan galloped into town on her horse, Khan. Hay dangled from her wind-blown hair. "Let's get you cleaned up," her mother said sternly. A hot bath, a new hairdo, a flowing gown, and fresh makeup transformed Mulan into a delicate young maiden. Mulan knew that was what the matchmaker was looking for, but she didn't feel like herself. Mulan's mother and grandmother knew she could use some extra help. Fa Li placed a flowered comb, a family heirloom, in her daughter's hair. Grandma Fa gave Mulan an apple for sanity, a pendant for balance, a jade necklace for beauty, and Cricky the cricket for good luck. Mulan was ready for the matchmaker. But things didn't go well. First, the ink from Mulan's arm smeared on the matchmaker's face. Then Cricky dove into the matchmaker's teacup. As Mulan grabbed the cup, tea spilled everywhere. Jumping up, the matchmaker landed on a hot stove and her clothes caught on fire. Out she ran into the street. Racing frantically after her, Mulan dosed the flames and the matchmaker with tea. "You will never bring your family honor," shouted the enraged matchmaker. Filled with shame, Mulan headed home. Gazing at her reflection in the temple stones, Mulan knew no matter how perfect her clothes or makeup, she would never be the delicate, graceful bride she was expected to be. She wondered if it was possible to be herself and still bring honor to her family. As Mulan sat sad and alone beneath a cherry blossom tree, her father joined her. Pointing to a bloom, he said, "This one's late, but I'll bet that when it blooms, it will be the most beautiful of all." Mulan smiled, but the peace was shattered by the sudden sound of beating drums and horses' hooves. "The Huns have invaded," Chi Fu announced. "One man from every family must serve in the Imperial Army." Knowing her father's injury would put him at increased risk, Mulan rushed forwards. "My father has already fought bravely," she said. Her boldness outraged Chi Fu. As grandmother Fa led Mulan away, Fa Zhu received his conscription orders. That night, Mulan watched her father practice sword fighting. Seeing him fall, she knew he was not strong enough to survive another war. She made a decision. Moving quietly, Mulan took Fa Zhu's conscription orders from his table and left her mother's hair comb in its place. She cut her hair short with her father's sword and dressed in his armor. Disguised as a man, Mulan rode Khan out into the stormy night. Even though women were forbidden but to be soldiers, she would join the army, risking her own life to save her father's. By the time her family awoke, she was long gone. Frightened for her safety, they prayed to the ancestors. In the family temple, Mushu, a small dragon, rang the gong to awaken the ancestors. "Rise and shine," he shouted. Mushu had once been a guardian, but he'd failed a task and lost that position. Now he hoped for a chance to save Mulan and prove himself. The ancestors just laughed at him. Then they told him to wake up the great stone dragon for the important mission. But the great stone dragon wouldn't be reused. Frustrated, Mushu hit it with his gong. The great stone dragon crumbled, fearing the ancestors' wrath. Mushu held up its head and roared, "I am the great stone dragon. I will go forth and fetch Mulan." Cricky showed up, eager to help. Together they decided they would make Mulan a hero and get Mushu promoted back to guardian. Mushu and Cricky reached Mulan outside the army camp. In the glow of a campfire, Mushu cast a large shadow. "I have been sent by your ancestors to guide you," he roared. "My ancestors sent a little lizard to help me," Mulan wondered when she saw the real Mushu. She was desperate for help. In the morning, she would report for duty. She had to learn to act like a man fast. Mulan entered the army camp with Mushu hiding in her collar. Meanwhile, in the officer's tent, General Li promoted his son Shan to the rank of captain. "You will stay and train the new recruits." Chi Fu thought Shan was too inexperienced. This is an enormous responsibility. General Li ordered Chi Fu to report on Shan's progress. Then he marched off with his troops to face the invading Huns at the Tung Pass. Shang and Chi Fu left the tent running into Mulan. "What's your name, soldier?" Shang asked. Mulan stuttered. "My name is Ping." Trembling, she handed him her conscription orders. Training began the next morning. Shang shot an arrow to the top of a tall pole. He called over Yao, one of the recruits, and tied a heavy bronze disc to each of his wrists, one for discipline and one for strength. He said, "Now retrieve the arrow." Yao failed, so did Mulan and the rest of the recruits. For the next drill, Shang handed out long poles to wield as weapons. Everyone stumbled about awkwardly, especially Mulan. Each day, Shang pushed the recruits almost to exhaustion. Finally, Mulan collapsed. Shang ordered her to pack up and go home. Defeated, Mulan turned to leave. But seeing Shang's arrow embedded at the top of the pole, she decided to try one last time. Putting a weight on each wrist, she climbed up and slid down. But then she had an idea. Looping the weights together, she made a brace and hoisted herself all the way to the top. Everyone cheered. Even Shang was impressed. Meanwhile, the Huns were advancing. Shan Yu's falcon brought him a child's doll. From the doll's scent, Shan Yu knew it had to come from the Tung Pass, where General Li's army was waiting. Sneering, he said, "The little girl will be missing her doll. We should return it to her." Mushu began plotting to get Mulan into battle so he could make her a hero. With Cricky's help, he composed a letter ordering Shang to lead the recruits to the Tung Pass. They signed it from General Li. Shang led his troops through the mountains. They came upon a village burned down by the Huns. The general's helmet laid on the ground. Shang plunged his sword into the snow and placed his father's helmet gently on top. Finding a child's doll among the ashes, Mulan led the small figure at the base of the memorial. "Were they only hope for the Emperor now?" Shang said. In silence, Shang's troops marched through the Tung Pass. Suddenly, a rocket in the machine's weapons wagon exploded, giving away their position. Thousands of flaming arrows instantly rained down on them. Shang's troops fired their cannons. It seemed as if the enemy had disappeared. But then, as the smoke cleared, Mulan saw hundreds of Han soldiers charging towards them. Bravely, Shang ordered Yao to aim their last cannon at Shan Yu. "Prepare to fight," he said. "If we die, we die with honor." A sudden idea spurred Mulan into action. She grabbed the cannon and raced towards Shan Yu. Lighting the fuse, she fired directly into the mountain. An avalanche of snow crashed down on the heads of the advancing Huns. Shan Yu lashed at Mulan with his sword. Then the avalanche buried him too. Mulan jumped on Khan's back. She reached down and pulled Shang up behind her, just as the wall of snow pushed them over a cliff. "Help!" Mulan called. Mulan tied a rope around Khan, knotted the rope to her arrow, and shot the arrow up to the soldiers. The soldiers pulled hard, but the icy ground started to give way. Just as it seemed they would all go over the cliff, Chen Po lifted the soldiers, and together they hauled horse and riders to safety. "Ping, I owe you my life," Shang said to Mulan. Suddenly, Mulan clutched her side. She'd been stabbed. The medic dressed the wound. Then he revealed her secret. Ping was a woman. Chifu charged Mulan with treason. He ordered Shang to kill her. Shang raised his sword, but then threw it down. Mulan had saved his life, so he spared hers. "My debt is repaid," he said. He ordered the troops to move on without her. Mulan, Kang, Mushu, and Cricky huddled miserably beside a small fire. Then they heard an angry howl echoing through the chasm. The howl of Shan Yu. He was alive. He and his 5 elite Huns were heading to the palace. Mulan had to warn Shang. At the Imperial City, a victory celebration was in full swing. Mulan reached Shang just before the Imperial Palace. "The Huns are alive," she called. "They're in the city." Still feeling hurt and betrayed, Shang didn't believe her. Shang was about to present the Emperor with Shan Yu's sword. Then the Hun's falcon swooped down, swiped the sword, and delivered it to his waiting master on the palace roof. Meanwhile, to the crowd's horror, the elite Huns emerged from behind a paper dragon. Knocking Shang out of the way, they dragged the Emperor into the palace and bolted the door. Thinking fast, Mulan disguised 3 recruits as women and led them to the palace. Using their sashes, they shunned up pillars to gain entry. Realizing he could trust Mulan, Shang joined them. Their disguises worked. Mulan and the recruits caught the guards by surprise and overcame them. Shang burst onto the balcony and confronted Shan Yu. They fought fiercely. Quickly, Mulan sent the Emperor sliding to safety on a rope with the recruits. Shan Yu raced to stop them, but Mulan cut the rope. Shan Yu charged at Shang, his sword drawed. "You took away my victory." "No," said Mulan. "I did." She pulled back her hair so he would recognize her. "The soldier from the mountains," he snarled. Mulan ran and he chased after her. Shan Yu lashed furiously, knocking down columns all around them as he raced after Mulan. On the roof, she turned to face him. He lunged and she grabbed his sword, using it to pin his cloak on the roof. "Ready, Mushu," Mulan called. Cricky lit a fuse, and Mushu soared in with a rocket, sending Shan Yu flying all the way to the fireworks tower. Fireworks exploded. The force sent Mushu and Cricky flying. It threw Mulan against Shang. Shan Yu's sword fell to the ground beside them as the fireworks tower burst into flames. Together, Mulan and Shang stared in wonder as streams of color lit up the night sky. Mulan's friends arrived, followed by Chifu and the Emperor. Then, to everyone's amazement, the Emperor bowed to Mulan. Stunned, they all followed his example. The Emperor honored Mulan with the gift of his pendant and Shan Yu's sword. Shang bid her an awkward farewell, then watched her ride away. The Emperor advised him, "The flower that blooms in adversity is the most rare and beautiful of all." At Shang's puzzled look, he added, "You don't meet a girl like that every dynasty." Back home, Mulan handed her father the Emperor's gifts. "The greatest gift and honor is having you for a daughter," Fa Zhu said. "I've missed you so." As they embraced, Shang arrived, and everyone was delighted to welcome him into the Fa family home, especially Mulan. And in the family temple, all the ancestors agreed Mushu had done well. He would become a guardian once again. Mulan had become a hero and a leader, bringing honor to her family in her own way. It was time to celebrate. And that's the end of the story about Mulan, the bravest woman that China has ever known.